All right, here we go. Series until this Outcast. We got a great show. We had a great guest, and recently we've been doing a lot of MC clubs and MC interviews. So today we have Vincent Card, whose father was a member of the Breed Motorcycle Club, which is an infamous club that doesn't exist anymore. But at one point it was a very, very powerful club on the East Coast. Vincent, what's happening, man?
Hey man, I appreciate you so much for having me on. I'm truly pleasured and much respect.
Oh, of course, anytime. Listen, you know what's funny is I remember I lived in Brooklyn and I went to then we when I was about 14, I moved to Staten Island, right? And I had a gym teacher, and he talked to us about the motorcycle club, the Breed. But I remember being, because I'm 48 now, so we're talking about the early 90s. And he was telling us about the Breed. We're in the locker room getting changed, and he's telling us about the Breed and what kind of guys they are, and the motorcycle club and all this stuff. And he had I don't remember the story, but he had a bullet wound in his calf, right? And when he looked at the guy, he just thought he was a regular laid back, gym teacher,
Yeah,
whatever,
just a
blah blah
dude.
blah. And then what happened was, fast forward some years later, I start doing some interviews on YouTube. And of course, I get Mooch on from the Mongols. I had Danny D'Lo on, Hollywood, I had Pee Wee. I'm like, there was another club. I think it was called The Breed. I can't remember my gym teacher's name. Anyway, so I go on YouTube and I look it up, and there it is. I think Vice did a show on them. Um, and I think the History Channel did a show on The Breed.
Yep.
So I started just going down the rabbit hole, right? Um, so then I reach out to uh Mooch, and I'm like, "Do you know anybody who knows anything about the Breed?" And he's like, "I know the perfect guy." And he sent me your Instagram, and
Mooch
then
is Mooch is like the coolest guy in the whole world.
he's great. He really he since I said this all the time, since I've started my YouTube channel, the guys that go out of my way to help me are federally indicted,
Yeah.
former former mafia, former biker guys. Those guys go out of their way. Yeah, no problem. I'll make a call for you. I'll talk to this guy, talk to that guy. You know what I mean? Like,
Because
no one.
history needs to be told.
Absolutely.
I mean, period. You know,
So, the Breed MC. Let's break it down. What exactly and who exactly they were. And then your father was a prominent figure during the heyday of the Breed in the 1970s, 80s, and whatnot. Breed MC established in Asbury Park, New Jersey in 1965. The club was disbanded in 2006. It was basically fighting a war on three fronts, right? It was the Hells Angels, the pagans, and law enforcement.
that kind of was in the early
Yeah,
70s too. Yeah.
yeah. And it looked like the 2006 when they really came down. I think they arrested 19 guys. It really dismembered the whole group, because by that point there were really it was only a handful of guys left, maybe 40 or 50 guys, and they were heavy into uh methamphetamine, racketeering, extortion, so on and so forth. At their peak, they were in New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania, Ohio, West Virginia, but their stronghold was always Pennsylvania and New Jersey.
Hmm.
And oddly enough, they had a chapter in Staten Island in New York.
Yes, it did. Very
But
strong.
I'm sorry.
Very strong.
Yeah, yeah. And in the 1970s, uh, they were fighting both the pagans and the Hells Angels, and it led to a lot of deaths. I think there's a story about the Hells Angels grenading one of their clubhouses, hand grenading
Yes.
one of their clubhouses. There's plenty
The
of
Long Island Clubhouse. Yeah.
yes, yeah.
Yeah.
So why don't we get into it? Tell me what you know about the club, and then we could talk about your dad and all the happenings that happen around it, and the major players, and so on and so forth.
So you're 100% correct on the history. That's how I understand it as well. The bombing you mentioned, or the bombs through the window or under the vehicles, was Long Island chapter was my father's chapter.
Okay.
So he was in Staten Island, as you know, you're from up that way. That's
Yeah.
very close.
Right. Yeah.
But my father's life was pretty wild and pretty crazy. He got full colors in 69, left in 72-ish. Um, as the judge told them to.
Oh,
But
I see.
you know, you mentioned it exactly correct. It was pagans, Hell's Angels, you know, and my father's story is insane. You know, just being almost not even 3 years. I mean, the Cleveland brawl against Hell's Angels and the Breed is the most notorious story that happened in Cleveland, Ohio,
Yeah.
1971. 56 guys get accused of or get basically first degree murder charges.
Mhm.
Uh, and my father's adage to me was nobody talked and everybody walked. But, you know, so that event in itself would have been a career for most outlaw bikers,
Right.
you know, but then, you know, 7 months later, he gets kidnapped by the pagans.
Your dad was.
Yes,
Oh,
yes.
let's before we move ahead, tell us more about the incident in Ohio. Let's kind of get into detail about that.
So the Breed chapter in Ohio was an up and coming chapter, and the Hells Angels were the powerhouse in Ohio. Hells Angels Ohio was probably their strongest chapter. You know,
Mhm.
everybody thinks of Los Angeles and Oakland and California. Ohio was where the dogs were.
Right.
Um, and they were a force, and those guys were the baddest of the bad. So
Right.
when the Breed chapter was up and coming there, you know, they were getting flack from the Angels, and the bike show at the Polish Women's Hall in 1971, March, um, was kind of the event that they knew the Angels would be there because they had semi-sponsored the event. They were going to have
Mhm.
show bikes there, and you know, they were going to show up. The Breed was still up and coming, even though they had started several years prior, but they were still, you know, who are you? You
Right.
know, so the Breed showed up in force, you know, and the story is, you know, it was 30 Hells Angels against 150 Breed members, you know, and you know, the narrative the Hells Angels preach is, well, 30 guys, 30 of us beat up 150 of them, you know, with the death head count in their
Right.
favor. But you know, most people don't realize that the fight lasted like a minute or two.
As they all do.
You know, there was police there,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
and it's not like it was a Royal Rumble where they all just got to beat heads until the last guy was standing,
Right.
you know, and I'm sure half the guys when the fight started jetted, you know, but my father did not,
Right.
you know,
Right. Right.
so he had he had a scar on his arm or his wrist that was probably 6 or 7 inches long, and he
Okay.
had it for life, you know, and again, this is before my time.
Right.
So, but I'm sure that that scar was a constant remember or reminder of, you know, the life he lived and,
Mhm.
you know, what he did. And
Right.
so it's just crazy,
All right.
honestly.
What was your dad's name? Obviously, it was Card, but what was his first name?
George.
Okay, George Card. Okay. Um, here's when from the little bit I know about motorcycle clubs. Like for example, let's take the pagans, for example, right?
Right.
Um, they want to move into different territory. Most clubs will form alliances knowing that um there's another major player. So, like for examples, when the pagans went through this, what they refer to as the blue wave, when they want to expand in the early
Mhm.
into the mid 2000s, they made alliances with the Mongols, from what I understand, knowing that they were going to get flack from the Hells Angels and so on and so forth. So, you know, they were able to have power on their side if anything should happen. But the Breed said, "Fuck it, we're going."
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah.
That's why I think that they caught flack in Ohio.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
I think so it's funny you mentioned that, and your segue this week is incredible. You were talking about the pagans the other day, and now you're
yeah.
talking about the Breed who, like I mentioned, kidnapped my father. But um, you know, the pagans and the Breed in his notes, my dad writes that, you know, they were cool in the 70s and then early 71.
Mhm,
I think, and I'm just putting dots together.
mhm.
The Breed went into Maryland, which I don't
Yes.
know that everybody knows about this,
Mhm.
but it's in his notes.
Okay.
And I don't know if they asked the pagans or didn't ask the pagans. I don't know. I'm not a member. I don't know that shit, but I'm just connecting dots. So I think that that's when the pagans as a whole said, okay, you're our new enemy.
Yeah,
You're
yeah, yeah, yeah. The pagans have a stronghold on Maryland, and it kind of
oh
always
yeah,
has.
that's the mother house.
Yeah. Now, let's get into again. I have to believe that that is the case because nobody makes moves like that because they came hard. The Hagans and the Angels came hard on the breed,
Yeah,
right? They did not make any alliances. It was all balls basically,
yeah.
right? So let's talk about your dad and his upbringing and his role because you said he got kidnapped. But I want to get to the kidnapping. But he was a full patch member of the breed. How far did he go in the club?
He was a full patch member. I have a photo of him in 1969 at Christmas, and he's wearing full colors.
Yeah.
And then in the back of the photo, it said Brother Death. His name was Death. Christmas 1969.
So his
And
nickname was Death.
yeah, so I believe that that photo was taken in the clubhouse,
Okay.
just judging by the framework of the home, because you
Hmm.
can see the clubhouse in the background there. I don't know if you can
Right.
see that in the frame.
I actually have the pictures you sent me. And at the end of this video, stick around, watch the whole video because at the end of the video, I'm going to put a collage of the pictures that Vincent sent me so everybody could see what he's talking about right now.
Yeah, so he patched over he was in a club called the Macabre
Mhm.
in '68. I don't know if it was prior to that. So he was in his mid-20s at that point.
Right.
So he's in the Macabre and they were in Long Island. And then in '69, I believe, several of them patched into the breed. Not all of
Mhm.
them did, but the guys that didn't remain friends. I've actually spoken to one of those guys that didn't patch in.
Okay.
And he sent me some photos of my father from 1968,
Wow.
and it was just like so amazing to see. Like the people I've connected with just from my page, it's just been like, holy shit,
Oh,
this is 55 years ago.
social media is great like that. Are you kidding? Social media is fantastic like that. People ask me all the time, how do you get your guests on? Instagram, Facebook,
Yeah.
TikTok. That's how it goes. Um, what was your father's upbringing like? Was he in the service? Because a lot of these guys came out of wars and they didn't really have a family background and they kind of had camaraderie within themselves. But
He was not. He couldn't get into he couldn't join the military because he was flat-footed.
okay,
But his father was Air Force. My grandfather was Air Force. So my dad was a military brat.
okay.
So he was born in Tallahassee and then moved to various places. And then there was an air base in upstate New York
Hmm.
that isn't there now, but that's kind of where the area of the world they gravitated to.
Okay. Do you know why he went into motorcycle clubs and so on and so forth?
I don't know the exact reason why. I think he liked the thrill. I mean, my father worked at Macy's in New York,
Doing what?
prior to being in the club and for time frame of while he was in the club. So he's
What was he
working at
doing at
Macy's.
Macy's?
He's, clerk,
Really?
yeah, stocking shelves, doing whatever.
Okay.
And just whatever, trying to build some sort of a life and
Right, right,
would
right, right.
ride, got a bike and found some guys to ride with. And as chance would have it, he met the guys in the Macabre. And then, they were in close proximity to the breed that was a
Mm,
newer club, or not newer, but, within 5 years.
right, right, right.
So he found them and he wrote in his notes that, he was either going to go pagan or breed. And he just enjoyed the camaraderie of the breed better
Hmm.
than what he saw with the pagan guys. But, so then the rest is history.
Now, during the 60s and 70s, I mean, these guys were rough dudes, but a lot of the guys, it seems like, from what I understand, a lot of the guys were guys that were really just, good dudes. They were tough guys, right? But they wouldn't back down from a fist fight or anything like that. But they weren't criminals, from what I understand. It kind of gravitated after so much time, the drug dealing, the racketeering, the extortion, so on and so forth.
All the
And,
crazy, all the mob stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of seemed like by the time you got to the 80s and 90s, I mean, don't get me wrong, it's kind of like after the Vietnam era, if you will, like after
Right,
75
right.
is when really they started really like murder, meth, cocaine, extortion, racketeering. Explain the breed, because the breed has this incredible reputation of being one of the largest meth dealers during the 90s and into the early 2000s in New Jersey and Pennsylvania, along with the Pagans. Um, Explain that transition because it seemed like your dad was before that time and he got out just in time.
Yeah. Yeah, so you're exactly correct. One of his, I've been fortunate enough to talk to four or five of his guys that were in the club at that time, which
Mhm.
is incredible. Having a conversation with a almost 80-year-old guy is,
Yeah, right. I can't believe they're still
that
alive.
remembers
Yeah,
my dad is like the coolest thing on earth. But
right.
yeah, there was a lot of ex-military guys, even
Mhm.
in 70, 68, 69, 70, 71, whatever it be. Um, and one of the guys that I spoke with told me, he said, we weren't the druggies, we were the drinkers.
Right, exactly. Okay, yes.
They didn't understand or even care to be drug dealers. If they
Hmm.
did drugs, they took, my dad called it speed. If they
Okay,
needed to stay up for a couple days, they'd take speed.
okay.
But if they were going to have a good time, they'd drink, beer, liquor, and
Right,
probably smoke.
right.
So it wasn't like, all right, how many pounds of methamphetamine can we deliver to Staten Island? It wasn't. It
Yeah,
wasn't any of that shit.
yeah, right, exactly. Okay. So, and people have to understand by and large, I mean, these were not, they were tough guys. They would not back down from a ballroom brawl, but it got to a certain point where it became more than that. And there were several major players that brought it to that. For some strange reason, I don't know why. I mean, the majority of, and maybe it was because about the 70s or 80s, maybe you could explain it. If for some strange reason, and I don't know why, the majority of motorcycle clubs within the United States wanted to kind of expand throughout the country, right? The outlaws, the banditos, the angels, the pagans, the Mongols, where the breed at a certain point, I would say, for the little bit of research I did, the late 80s, they kind of decided that we're just going to have a stronghold in New Jersey and Pennsylvania,
Yeah. Yep.
right? Okay, can you
That
explain the thought process behind that?
so by that time, Long Island and Staten Island were gone.
Hmm.
They had been defunct, and I think you know uh, the stuff you're talking about. My father, I don't think would have been. He wouldn't want to be part of
Right,
that.
right.
Because when he was in, there was no rule book, there was no manual. You were
Yeah,
just a badass, and you were fucking, fighting for territory. But the territory you're talking about, and that's no different than the local drug dealer.
right,
That's his shit. That's his territory. That's his dirt.
right. Okay,
Stay out of my dirt.
right,
So, and it's no different than mob. You've
right.
had a bunch of mafia stuff on that I've watched. Those
Yeah,
guys are about territory.
absolutely.
Stay out of my damn neighborhood.
Yeah. But oddly enough, it made the feds and the ATF easier to focus on them because they weren't spread out, which inevitably led to their demise because they didn't have other chapters in other regions of the country that could rise up, that could like,
Yeah.
right? They were at one point, I would say 1990 was really the turning point where they had major players in Philadelphia and New Jersey, and the feds and the ATF could really focus on them in that area, and that led to I believe what was it? What year was it? 2000. So what was the early 2000s? By
Yeah.
2000, by 2006, they had 19 of the major players locked up. Um, One of the major players was John Napoli, who, from what I understand, was really the brains behind. the stronghold in New Jersey and Pennsylvania, and the methamphetamine and so on and so forth. And from what I understand, he was from Philadelphia, and he kind of ran it like the mafia.
He was the man.
Yeah, yeah,
He was the man. And
he was the
I've actually had the pleasure of not speaking to him, but communicating with him.
okay,
And it was a pretty wild experience. So
okay,
I guess he saw my page on
yeah,
Instagram. I'm sure some of his guys told him about it.
yeah, right, right, right,
And that was when you see that come up on your phone, it's kind of like a holy shit,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
kind
yeah,
of
yeah,
to the nth degree. But he was so cool to me. He was
yeah.
like, man, love what you're doing with your page, how you're honoring your dad, you know, just a super nice guy.
Right, 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 right. Well, to
Which
you, well, you get he's in jail for
yeah,
yeah. To
yeah,
you, he's in
yeah,
jail
yeah.
for 30. I mean, there's a story about him where he told a prospect to deliver a certain amount of meth, and the prospect didn't want to be involved in drugs, and he beat him and tortured him so much so that from the story that I read, him and a couple of other breed members beat him into unconscious, and then when the guy regained consciousness, he started drilling drywall screws into his leg, and then he apparently was dousing him with gasoline, but they were in his house. And he was going to light him on fire. And the other guy said to him, "You're going to wind up lighting your house on fire." So that guy, if he was anywhere else, would have gotten burned alive because he was in Napoli's house. So these are the guys that they that the difference between the mafia and the biker clubs, besides the motorcycles and not being clean shaved, is basically like um how can I say this? The biker guys kind of go above and beyond to show how vicious they are, where the mafia guys, it's like 38 to the back of the head and you're gone.
Right. So, and I've heard
Right.
that story, and that's pretty crazy shit,
Yeah, 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 yeah,
to
exactly.
say
Yeah.
the least. And I'm glad he was nice to me. So, I say my
Oh.
prayers every night for that. But
Yeah.
but yeah, I don't think with them and specifically my father, I don't think, they had a moral compass. My father was a good man, but when came time to do a certain thing or take care of business, I don't think, and I'm speaking about my father primarily, I don't think that they forethought about the consequence.
Hmm.
Like, okay, we can go take care of this situation or handle this problem, but okay, what if we all get caught?
Right. Right.
You know what I mean? Whereas the mob guys are like, you know, you know,
I
that
got
can,
you. Yeah. Right.
yeah,
Right. Exactly. Right. Right.
yeah,
Right. Right. Yeah. Now let's get into your dad a little bit because you did say after that whole Ohio incident in 71, right? You said
yep,
71.
yep.
He was kidnapped. Why don't you get into that a little bit?
So they went to war with the pagans. So at the time in 71, they were at war with both the Hells Angels and the pagans. So I mentioned in the Hells Angels Ohio chapter, which was a powerhouse. The guys in Manhattan were the powerhouse,
Yes.
the
Yeah.
Third
Yeah.
Street group.
Yeah. They
So,
recently sold that building a few years back
did they
too.
really?
Yeah, and they
They're
relocated to the Bronx.
better off burning it down. But
Yeah.
anyway, so those guys are what, 30, 40 minutes from Long Island,
Yeah.
and in a smooth ride at night.
Right. Right. Right.
So yeah, they were, after the Ohio event, the Breed Cup House was, targeted for bombs, and so they were also at war, like I mentioned, with the pagans. And my father's story is, he was up for a couple nights worrying about the angels.
Mhm.
So he had a meeting planned with the hierarchy of the pagans and two other breed guys to go meet at a diner on a set date to
Mhm.
stop the war, to basically try
Okay.
to smooth things over.
Right.
So the night before, or the day before they were set to have that meeting with the pagans, my father went home to take a nap because he had been up for days, worrying about the angels, and got kidnapped from his home
Hmm.
by the pagans. So it's just kind of like, like I said, the Ohio story would be crazy enough. And
Right.
then several months later, not even several months, a few months later, this happens.
Right. Right. Right.
And, so they took him, they kidnapped him from the home. The story that I sent you a little tidbit of is,
Yeah.
three guys come in his room, one of them shaking a pistol. And he said, stop shaking that pistol. And it's just like, how cool of a motherfucker do you have to be to tell your kidnapper, stop shaking that fucking pistol?
Yeah. Right. Meanwhile,
I
if you're gonna
mean,
do if you're gonna do is do it right, don't be nervous, you pussy.
right. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
so
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
basically told him to get dressed. And he said, don't take my kid, who was my older stepbrother at the time, and his ex-wife, don't mess with them, take me. So
Right.
they took him to the president's house and took him up in the attic and pistol whipped him and wanted information from him. So
Okay.
he basically said, and I don't know if the rules for that were the same as mob rules, where you don't kill a president.
Yeah. Well, as I've learned in the last week, there is in the mafia, there's what's referred to as the commission. And if
Right.
you have to kill a boss of a crew, you have to get permission from the commission. Where in the biker life, they don't call it the commission; they call it the mother club,
Hmm.
which is basically it's a decentralized club. There's
The
no
main
actual
chapter.
right. There's no actual there's no actual clubhouse, but the bosses of every chapter get together and discuss. And if you want to kill the president of another club, you have to get the okay from the mother chapter. That's
Right.
from what I understand. Those are the rules.
So yeah, so in that in its own is crazy. So he's up in the attic, getting pistol whipped and interrogated, and I don't know what they wanted from him. I don't know what kind of information they wanted.
Hmm.
Um, but the story he told me is, they tied me up to a chair and sat me there, and there was three or four of them, and they wanted information, and he said he wasn't going to talk, and he said, you might as well just shoot me because
Right,
I ain't
right.
seen shit.
Yeah, yeah.
So what they ended up doing is just beating the shit out of him, put him in a body bag, and dumped him by railroad tracks the following morning or that evening, and then
Hmm.
just drove away.
Now, your father was the president of the Long Island chapter?
At that time, yes.
Ah, okay, okay. So
So he
because of
wasn't
that, his
president the whole time. So
okay,
he was co-president with another gentleman. They were both consistently getting caught for various
yeah,
charges. So
yeah,
back then it was weapons.
yeah.
So
Okay,
if the president at the time went to jail for a weapons charge or had to take a leave for heat that he was catching or whatever, they kind of, I don't know if they traded off, but at some point my father was president.
right, right. The 70s seem to be the early 70s, late 60s, early 70s seems to be the explosion of handguns, shotguns,
Yep.
semi-automatic rifles within the U.S. because
Yep.
crime skyrockets with those guns in the late 60s, early 70s, and they're mass produced and so on and so forth. So inevitably, it becomes something on the black market for guys that are involved in the biker world or gang members or mafia and so on and so forth. So it's a moneymaker. So yeah, they would buy and sell loads of guns, ammo, grenades, whatever the
Mhm.
rocket. I mean, I've heard stories about rocket launchers. I mean, crazy, crazy, crazy things. You know,
So the other part is, my father was arrested multiple times between 69 and 72. Most of it for weapons,
right?
and we hash over the part that he was on trial for first degree murder in Ohio with 56 other guys. But
Mm.
that, almost as crazy as that is, his stories after that are even crazier, the
Mhm.
kidnapping and so forth. But yeah, they were planting bombs under each other's cars and
Yeah.
throwing shit through windows. And a rival club drove by the clubhouse in Long Island and threw a bomb into the house that they thought was the clubhouse, and it was
Wow.
the adjacent house next door that burned down.
Wow.
Yeah,
Jeez.
yeah. So it was cowboys and Indians, man. It was
Yeah.
crazy.
So Yeah, and people have to remember that there was no surveillance back then. There was no
No,
smartphone. There
no.
was no all you basically had was eyewitnesses or and
Yeah.
fingerprints of that. And
Or I
I
drive by and hope this guy's sleeping.
yeah, and eyewitnesses are most likely not going to talk if they think there's a
Mm-mm,
threat, you
mm-mm.
know. All right, so your father's kidnapped, dumped on the side of the road in a body bag. What happens from there?
So he calls the station, and I have the newspaper clipping. It's insanity, but
Mm,
I'm sure they leave a bunch of stuff out. So he gets out of the bag, makes a phone call to his neighbor or to a club member, says, "Hey, I'm over here at this station, this train station, Hicksville's train station. I need somebody to come get me."
hmm
And so the police come because his wife at the time had already made a police report. My cousin just got kidnapped by three dudes.
hmm
So that's insane as it is. So he goes to the station, gets interrogated by the cops, and my dad he was a real one, man. He didn't talk. He
Yeah,
didn't tell him who kidnapped him. He didn't tell him what happened. He just said, "I want to go home."
right, right. Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
that in itself is that's
Yeah, well, from what I understand, again, from interviewing Pee Wee from the Hells Angels, one of the rules is you don't contact the police for anything, even if there's an emergency and you got to call 911.
Mhm.
The club handles it. If there's an
Yeah,
emergency, you call the club,
yeah.
right? So when Pee Wee's situation, he got into a fight at his son's wedding, and they wind up beating up, I think, two or three Mongols.
Yeah, that was a crazy story. I watched that
And
episode.
the cops came, and he spoke to the cops and said it was self-defense, and he got a lot of shit for it because he spoke to them. You
Yeah,
know, but yeah, it's unbelievable. But yeah, man, back then the men were they were made different. In general, they were just
Mhm.
made different. They kind of they took matters into their own hands if there was a problem. Going to the police was like maybe your second decision if
Yeah,
if you couldn't rectify it
right.
yourself.
And there was a story, and I found the actual archive in New York Newsday in
Hmm.
1970 or 71, before the Pagans and Breed went to war.
Right.
There was a story of um, there was a couple of pagans at the Breed clubhouse, and my father was there,
Hmm.
and the cop, and the paper's crazy. They had it so bad for the Breed. He was walking by the clubhouse and looked in the door and saw a gun on a table. And it's like, okay, buddy.
Yeah.
But there were two pagans there, and they had a couple of pills on the table, and there was a gun, and my father took the rap.
Mm.
Didn't didn't say it was theirs, said that's my stuff, and
Right.
went to jail for it.
Right.
Didn't say anything, just he was a man's man. And
Yeah. Yeah.
that's hard to find this day and age.
Yeah, those guys, the boomer generation, the silent generation, which was the generation before. I think your dad was considered the silent generation because the same generation as my father. Those guys were um
Honorable.
yeah, they it was unbelievable. Because you got to remember they were born in the middle of the Great Depression.
Yep.
They lived through World War II,
Yep.
right? They saw, and so their word meant everything.
Hmm.
I mean, I don't know if you saw the video I did on my father, but similar things, similar situations with my old man, only it was more of the mafia stuff. And those guys, man, back then, those guys, their word was everything.
Yes.
They truly defined the expression "a man of your word."
Yes.
You know,
Yeah. To a T.
yeah. Now, how did you? Because you said that your father was only in the club for 3 years. What
Mhm.
made him leave the club? I mean, he took all this punishment. He went to war. He laid his life on the line for these guys, and then he decided that no more.
He got into a lot of legal trouble. He was
Hmm.
arrested multiple times, excluding the murder thing that happened in Cleveland. He was arrested for weapons several times. Um, so it got to a point where he was going to catch significant time.
Okay.
So, like we talking about earlier, the world's a small place. Instagram's a crazy thing. When I first started my page, I had like three photos of my dad. I had
Right.
his colors. Um, thanks to our dear friend Sue, who's been an absolute champion for my page and just an awesome human being. Because she,
What's the name of your page so people could go to it?
it's Breed MC New York with underscores in between all that.
Oh, I see. Okay. Well, I'm gonna put it in the description so people could just go and check out all the photos you have.
So
Just
she had
click
given
and
me a
go.
bunch of memorabilia that my father gave her after he passed or
Hmm.
left with. Um, and she actually sent all that stuff to me. So, like I said, I started the page with like 3 photographs and his cut, which
Right.
is, the first thing I ever posted got, I think, 7 likes,
Right.
which
Right.
I started posting stuff not because I wanted fame and to be on a podcast, which this is literally mind blowing, but but I just wanted a place to post my dad's stuff, to have his legacy memorialized.
Right. Right.
It
Right.
wasn't about likes or shares, or it was like, hey, this is my dad. He was a cool motherfucker
Right.
back in
Right.
the
Right.
heyday, and here's some stuff about him. You
Right.
know, um, and one of his guys, his sergeant at arms, and one of his team members on what they call drill team, which is the taking care of business crew,
Mm.
actually saw one of my posts when I posted a picture of my dad speaking to the club. Um, and he said, hey, that's me in that picture.
Really? That's
And I was
cool.
like, no fucking way.
Yeah, that's
You
cool.
know what I mean? It's like,
How old was the guy when he contacted you?
he's 79 years old.
Yeah. Yeah.
At the
Yeah.
time,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
like,
Right.
holy shit.
Yeah, that's
First of
crazy.
all, he's on Instagram. Second of all, he found my shit
Yeah,
somehow
right,
on
right.
his scroll. It wasn't
Yeah.
like I didn't know who he was.
Right, right,
And so
right,
we
right.
ended up talking, and he's like, yeah. So back to your point about how my dad left the club, the guy that I spoke with sent me a couple of pictures and sent me the picture of him and my dad in front of the clubhouse, which I
Mhm.
think you can see in the back,
Right.
which was probably from 69. He showed up to my dad's hearing. He had bonded my father out.
Hmm.
And then my dad had a second hearing for his, I guess, whatever his sentence or bail was going to be or whatever. I honestly, I don't know how it works, but
Hmm.
so he showed up and my dad skipped it.
Hmm.
And then my dad basically said, look, I got a lot of fucking heat on me. I gotta, I gotta go.
Right, 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 right.
And it wasn't that he was worried about pagans or angels. He was worried about judges and courtrooms.
Yeah. Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah. He was fighting three different wars. You have
Yes.
to excuse me. Give me 5 minutes, please.
Yep.
Sorry.
Upstate New York, where his mom lived with her new husband, or my grandma
Hmm.
lived, and just tried to start a new life for himself.
Okay.
He knew he was going to catch holy hell and just took off.
Did he ever get caught from the, did he ever go, was he ever arrested after that because of skipping town?
Yeah, he was, and then I actually have a copy of his, or a penned transcript of his letter to his judge.
Ah,
He basically details his life, from his upbringing to, you know, I was in the breed for a couple of years. And the one thing he mentioned in his letter to his judge that stuck with me, which I think is the ultimate biker club thing, is he said, no one can understand what it's like to be in a club, in the brotherhood.
mhm.
And he wrote that to his judge,
Yeah,
in
yeah.
between, like, I'm trying to stay straight and narrow, and I've got a job as a boat mechanic, and just trying to do right, but the judge didn't listen.
No. Yeah, of course. Yeah. I'm sure the judge reads letters like that, a
Yeah,
thousand times a week,
yeah,
and he
woe is
doesn't
me.
know.
Yeah,
Yeah, he doesn't know what's sincere and what's not, right?
right.
Yeah. So go ahead.
No, so yeah, he wrote that letter, and he did time. And the other thing, like I mentioned about my father, which is true with the mafia stuff, is he never talked.
Hmm.
He could have he could have thrown everybody under the bus. You know,
Right.
there's other guys in other clubs that went into witness protection and, you know, got caught. And same with mob guys. You
Absolutely.
know,
Yeah.
they get caught and they talk. You
Yeah.
know, my father never talked. He never
Yeah.
said anything about nobody. He did his time, he got out, and he lived his life.
How much time did he wind up doing?
I think about a year because around that
Okay.
time, that was 1975,
Hmm.
and I was born in 77. So
Okay.
I
All
think he
right.
was out for a short time, met my mom, and
Yeah. The guys that, and you know, this is before the RICO law. You know, this is before the mandatory 1 year sentence for just having a handgun on you, right? Um, Today, I think I mean, the generation is different, but a lot of the guys rat today when they're going to hit you with what they refer to as football numbers, 20, 30, 40 years. Then they go, oof, no, no, thank you. Right. But at the same time, you knew what you were getting into. But so then after your dad comes out, what is he doing for a living? Because now he has a family, as you, he has, you know, your older brother.
so basically at that time, it was just me in the picture with my mom,
Hmm.
and he got a job as a auto body mechanic. He painted cars.
Ah, oh, great. Okay.
Yeah, so he had
Good
a
trade.
badass, when I was a little kid, he had a badass GTO,
Oh, God, those cars are
1971.
great.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So cool story about the GTO is, you know, I got bullied in about second grade ish. You
Yeah.
know, I'm 6'5", so in second grade, I was as tall as the sixth graders.
Oh, Jesus. Yeah.
You know, so I had some kids, you know, taking my glove, taking my ball, not letting me play kickball, and
Yeah. All right.
I was upset about it. You know, that's, you know, when you're in second grade, you don't understand why you're getting bullied.
Yeah.
You know, and
Sure.
I'm as tall as them, I'm as big as them. And so my father, when I was younger, we didn't live together. So he drove up 2 hours away and went to school with me that morning and found the kids that were bullying me and basically told them, you need to quit bullying my kid. And I'm standing there like, you
Oh,
know.
boy. Yeah. Yeah. Second grade. Yeah. Right.
So that was the first time I saw the switch. You know, my father had a
Yeah.
switch.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And he goes, you tell your parents if they have a problem with this, I'll go throw them in the river.
Yeah. Yeah.
There was a river behind the elementary school, and I'm
Yeah,
just sitting there
I had
like,
the opposite effect. Mine was the opposite effect. My father said, if you don't handle it yourself, you should be more afraid of me than those kids.
no, no,
Yeah,
he protected the shit out of me, man.
yeah. It's unbelievable. So now let's get into a little bit of detail. Explain the cuts of the breed, because out of all I mean, the Hell's Angels death head symbol is iconic, but the breed is so patriotic. Their
Yeah.
colors. Good. Why don't you talk about their actual
So,
colors?
so the breed cut is much different than the others. So I've seen some other cuts. I actually ran into a pagan at a bar several months ago, which I was just like, okay, I got to get the fuck out of here.
Yeah.
But you know, theirs is all, it's pretty much flat. So the colors of the breed, the top and bottom rocker and the flag are raised.
Ah,
So it's
okay.
the original 13 colony, you know, which I think somewhat symbolized, you know, what they wanted for 13 chapters. But
Right.
um, you know, and I think I mentioned to you before, you know, they were never going to go to California.
Yeah.
You know, they were never going to go to the Midwest, really. You know, they
Yeah.
East Coast, and like we talked about earlier, this is
Right.
our dirt, this is our territory.
Yeah.
You know, we're not going to go out, just stay away from us, kind of thing.
Right.
But no, it's a cool cut, and to have a cut that's 55 years old is
Yeah.
pretty.
So it's the Betsy Ross flag,
Yep.
basically. And on top it says a breed. And on the bottom, do they have where they're from? Because I know the pagans just put they don't put where they're from, they just put
Yeah,
like
so I don't know if you can see it. So the breed in Long Island and Staten
ah,
Island both had New York rocker at the top. So it
okay.
wasn't Staten Island or Long Island, it
It
was
was
just New
New
York.
York. Okay,
And then
so
there was
that's
Albany guys, and it was just one.
okay.
And I
Now,
don't know actually why, but I think that's cool.
yeah, absolutely. The Betsy Ross flag is definitely cool because it shows, you know, patriotism. But let's break down the cuts. Cuts are basically your vest, your colors. It's all the same
Mhm.
thing, right? A couple of things. If you have three rockers, if you have a top rocker, if you have a centerpiece, and you have a bottom rocker, and even if you have a denim jacket, that basically states that you are what's referred to as a 1% club, which means you are technically referred to as an outlaw club. And you can't have those cuts in that fashion unless you're blessed by one of the big five, the Banditos, the Hells Angels, the Mongols, the Pagans, who else? Who was I? Banditos, the Angels, the Mongols, the Pagans, and the Outlaws.
Yep.
And then you could become what's referred to as a support club. Because if you have that, and you're not blessed by one of the big five, then and you have just like a 1% patch on you, or you have the three patch vest in denim, they usually beat the hell out of me.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
for the most part.
yeah,
I
yeah,
don't
yeah.
know that the breed were ever actually one percenters, quote unquote.
Right, 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 right.
So back in the time, back in the day, in
Yeah.
70s, we're considered one of the big five. You know,
Okay, yeah. Yeah, I could see that. Sure.
they were
Sure.
in the mix.
Yeah, they were definitely
Not
in
they
them.
were, fifth man.
Right, 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 right. Yeah, I could definitely see that. But can you go into your father's relationship? Because you can't talk about the breed without talking about Salvatore. How do you pronounce his last name? DeLulio?
Yeah.
DeLulio.
Yep.
Some refer to him as the old man, some refer to him as the WAP. Did he have a relationship with him?
So when it was my father's day, it was Wob.
Okay.
Yeah. And so he was the man. And then also Scab became national president.
Now, who was scared?
So I was told, the story I was told is on his 21st birthday, he was anointed national president.
No, but what was his real name? The guy scared.
I don't know his real name.
Okay. Well, I'll have to look that up. So, for people who don't know, the term WAP is a derogatory term for Italian Americans, and what it actually means is when you came over from Italy and you didn't have a passport, they would write WAP WOP on your clothing without passport. So
Yep. Exactly. Yep.
so he was basically if I'm correct, the WAP or the old man was basically the national president. Is that accurate?
I don't know that he was national president. My understanding is he was founder and chapter president in Jersey,
Okay.
and then Scab became national president
I
around the
see.
same time frame, the early
Okay.
maybe 70-ish.
Now, are both of those guys still alive?
Scab is not. I tried to find him. Actually found his daughter, who I've spoken
Hmm.
to, which
Okay.
again, the world is a small place.
Right.
Cool conversation with her. Her mother, Scab's wife, is still alive, and she actually asked her mom if she remembered my father,
Okay.
which some of the things she said about him, I knew that she did remember him.
Okay. Okay.
She said he was a gentleman, soft spoken. And I was like, yeah, she remembered him.
I'm trying to because I have information pulled up. I'm trying to read if we could find his real name. I don't see anybody named
I believe his
Skip.
first name is Andrew.
Andrew. Okay. No big deal. So
He
did
was
you
in
fall?
Cleveland with my father. He was also in Connecticut with my father.
Okay. And how did your father become president of the Long Island chapter? Was it through one of those two?
I don't know exactly how that hierarchy works. I'm sure
Okay.
he would have to be voted in. I
Right.
mean, those guys can't just be like, yeah, whatever you want to do. So
Okay.
my father was with WAP and Scab often.
Okay.
They were both at the Cleveland event prior to
Okay.
my father becoming a president.
Right. Okay.
So it's kind of like, you do certain things and hey, you're the man.
Yeah. So your dad was in the mix with the originators.
Oh yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
if he would have, well, I mean, he obviously made the right decision, right? But it sounds like if he would have stayed, he would have been one of those top guys, if you will.
for
But in
sure.
the long run, because if he's hanging out with the national president and the old man, which I've heard, uh, in the 1990s and into the early 2000s, nothing got done without the old man's approval.
Sure.
This is just
Sure.
what I've
Yeah.
heard, what
I've
I've
read the
researched.
same.
Um, Basically, I don't see his name, but what was his relationship with uh the old man? Do you know? I know he's very close, but was it more business? Was it expanding the club? Was it only club business? Were they like family members?
So I think it was mainly business. You know,
Okay.
my dad in his personal notes, and again, I don't know if I mentioned this, he had about 9 pages of handwritten notes that
Yeah.
I transcribed into type because I recognize his handwriting and all that. And he mentioned WAP a couple of times, but he mentioned Scab the most. Like they
Okay.
go to Connecticut because a club there was going to patch Hell's Angels, and he went up there with Scab to talk to them and convince them not to
Mhm.
convince.
Right, right, right.
Um, so he mentioned Scab several times in his notes.
Hmm.
So the national president, who was Scab, like I mentioned, was either with him in another state or at the Long Island chapter on multiple occasions.
Okay.
So the only picture my father had of any member that wasn't in the Long Island chapter, he had a photo of Scab.
Okay. All right.
So, and I even asked because the picture was Scab and his sergeant at arms, who's about 6'5" or 6'6". And I said, so was Scab short or was the other guy a giant? And he said both.
No.
But he said, you don't mess with Scab.
Right, right, right. Yeah, some of the nicknames. I mean, your father's nickname is Death, Scab. Um, uh, they're nicknames that they probably had to live up to them,
Yeah.
right? They
Yeah.
probably had to live up
Yeah.
to them. There was a gangster in my old neighborhood in Brooklyn that his nickname was the Grim Reaper. And he lived up to it too. He really,
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
So how was your dad with you growing up? Was he rough on you? Was it
No, he
discipline?
was, you know, what the weirdest thing was is I didn't realize that he was in a club until I was probably, I mean, he had a painting that he did with the club of names. You know, it was the patch in the middle or the colors in the middle, and then the club names of all the Long Island guys all around it.
Mhm.
And so he had that framed in his room, and it was probably, I don't know, 12 by 18 or something. So it was a fairly large photo or painting. And so I used to just stare at it as a kid. And by the time I got to be about a teenager, I was like, so what, what, what's the deal with this?
Right,
You
right,
know,
right.
and why do certain guys have little dots next to their names and the others don't? And,
Hmm.
and so he sat me down as a teenager and said, yeah, I was in a club and, he never glorified it and also never made apologies for it, but he wouldn't bring it up unless I asked the question.
Mm.
So I say that because I've talked to a couple of members that were in with him that have children, and they say, "No, my kids don't know. I never
Mhm.
told."
Right, right, right.
So it was me being inquisitive
Yeah,
that then he started talking.
right,
So
right, right.
no, he was just a normal guy. I knew he had a switch. Obviously, when I was in elementary school,
Right, 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 right.
he threatened to throw some parents in a river.
Yeah, yeah.
But no, he was just a normal guy. I knew it was a little strange when I was preteen and he popped the trunk one time and I saw a sawed off shotgun in there and I was like, what's that about? He's like, I don't, don't worry about it.
Yeah,
And
yeah, yeah.
if we go into Burger King, he'd sit facing the door.
Yeah.
And if I sat there first, he'd say, no, you gotta switch with me.
Let me sit there. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
So
well, I mean, what's funny again, there's a lot of similar, even though we don't come from the same ethnicity, there's a lot of similarities from people from that era. My father
yes,
always, my father always carried a gun.
yeah,
Always.
yeah.
He always had a 38 snub nose in his briefcase,
Mhm.
and he always had an automatic handgun in the house. No,
Yeah,
neither one of them was legal, but he always had it. Always. I mean,
right.
it's just,
Yeah.
I remember there was a guy. He at one point, my father had an electrical supply house, and there was a guy that wanted to uh, talk to somebody because he wanted to use the bathroom. And the guy walked in, and right before the guy, and I was in preschool. I was in grade school, and then my father goes out to talk to him, but right before he puts the 38 in the back in his back pocket.
Mhm.
You know, it was that generation that was like,
Yeah.
they had this mentality of
Trust no one.
trust no one, protect your family, protect yourself.
Hmm.
Don't rely on police unless absolutely necessary. They were real men.
Yeah.
They were real men, and well, unfortunately, that attitude is gone. And I really wish we had it back. And I truly believe if men had that same attitude back, we probably wouldn't be in the shitstorm of what the country has become today.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Like,
Yeah. Because
like,
that parallels many different, dynamics of the world,
yeah. I
not
mean,
just
listen,
a mob or biker. It's
and I'm not being,
how
I'm
people
not,
conduct their life in general.
yeah, I'm not exaggerating. Okay. So what I mean by that is, neighborhoods used to be segregated. They're not segregated anymore. Okay.
Mhm.
For the most part, they're not segregated anymore. But what I mean by that is back in the day, uh, if you wanted to come into a particular neighborhood to do a crime, you knew better not to go there.
Mhm.
Right? Or if you went to, and even the biker guys, if the club was in a particular neighborhood, they did not want heat from the police. So they did not allow strangers, just like the mob guys, just like anything
Yeah.
else, but just even regular citizens. It's very simple. If I want to rob a house and I know the guy in the house that I'm going to rob has a sort of shotgun and has a violent past, fuck it. I'm skipping. I'm going to the next house.
Yeah.
Right. But the majority of guys today don't have that attitude. So I truly believe that is one of the reasons why crime is so high.
Yeah. No, and I read a story, and I don't forget where I totally forget where I saw it from, but it was a white dude walking through a black neighborhood, and walked across the street because he thought that he should, and then one of the guys gave him a hard time, and the other black guys came across the street and took care of the other black guy.
Yes, I've heard that same story because they were actual drug dealers,
Yeah, they
and
wouldn't
and
want him in
they
his, they didn't
and
want him. Yeah, they didn't want problems.
they didn't want the heat because they wanted the
Yes.
business. Yeah, I heard
Can't
the
kill a white guy in our
same.
neighborhood. Yeah, what
Yeah,
the
the
fuck's
cops will
wrong
be
with
all over
you?
the place. Yeah, 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 yeah,
Yes.
yeah. I heard the
I don't know where
same
I
thing.
saw that, but yeah.
Yes, yeah, it's the truth. It's true. And um, just a couple more questions, and I'm going to let you go. We can't talk about your dad being in a motorcycle club without talking about what kind of motorcycle he had.
So he had a Harley Sportster.
Okay.
Um, one of the things that, and I talked to a member recently, probably 3 weeks ago, and the coolest comment he left me with was, and I'm reading it from some notes. He said, "Death was the complete outlaw. He had a good Harley, was big and tough, had the look, and took the club very seriously."
Okay.
And that's
Oh,
like,
yeah, that sums him up.
that
That
was like
sums.
the coolest compliment in the whole world.
Yeah, that's not that
Because
basically
every
sums.
kid looks at their dad as like, "Oh, my dad was so awesome,"
Yeah.
but then to hear it from somebody else, it's like, wow.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
comes
Yeah.
back to why I started the page, with
Right. Right.
taking
Right. Right.
photographs and a cut.
Did he continue riding even after he left the club?
He didn't have a bike until I was again about a teenager. He bought a bike from my uncle.
Okay.
Wasn't a Harley, wasn't anything fancy. He had joined another club. They call it a bait, which I guess they just, they ride for charities and
Yeah.
collect money and do stuff like that.
There's
And
plenty of clubs like that. There's
he had
so
a
many of
different
them.
nickname. They called him Shadow,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
because he was kind of off in the distance and didn't,
Yeah.
my dad was not an extrovert,
Right. 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 Right.
and he certainly at that time wasn't going to talk about who he was.
Yeah. Right. 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 Right.
So the cool story is, his friends later in life, my dad passed when he was 67, 68.
Yeah.
So
My
he had
dad. Yeah.
friends, from by the time I left the house, he was 50 something.
Hmm.
So he lived another 15, 20 years without me around. And, he had made a bunch of friends. And the craziest part, when I started the Instagram page, there was a handful of them that didn't even know who my
Yeah,
dad.
yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, man, listen,
It's
it's so
like, oh my
funny.
God, I knew he was in a club, but he never, and it's
Yeah,
like,
it's so funny because my dad died at 69, and it's the same kind of thing. He wasn't if you were to speak to him, he wasn't an extrovert. He was very sociable. He had a very good businessman's camouflage, if you will.
mhm.
They were just made different back then,
Yeah.
man.
Yeah.
They
Isn't
were
that
just
crazy?
they were just made different. You
Same song, different verse. Yeah.
yeah, they were just made to, today it's flesh. It's pounding your chest. Yes,
Yeah. That shit.
it's what I do. I did. Even
Yeah.
you see fighters that come to the ring dancing and so on and so forth. And I'm like, did they ever even look at how Tyson used to come to the ring?
Right.
Like with no
Just
music, a
stagnant.
towel, and that's
Yeah.
more intimidating than dancing and having dancing girls with you and whatever. But that's
Yeah.
the reflection of the generation. And it's so funny because there's a lot of similarities, but um the only thing is my dad's friends, the difference was my dad's friends always were the same kind of guys. He could never hang out. He could have relationships with straight regular people, right? When I say straight, I don't mean like gender. I mean
Mhm.
like straight laced, right? He could have a but his buddies were all like him. They're all scam artists. They're all of them, you
So
know.
did he talk about his life with you?
Oh yeah, 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 yeah,
He
yeah, yeah,
did?
yeah. There were a couple of times where he didn't want to, but if because he had three sons, so if we were all together, he would tell stories and so on and so forth.
Okay.
It wasn't as it was a lot different because he got involved with major players in the mafia to advance his success in life. Right. It wasn't
All right.
like
He's smart.
it was a little bit different because he was in construction and his attitude, well, it was, well, if I don't during the 70s, 80s, if you're in construction, um, you had to
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
but then what happened was once he got involved, then it kind of went to his head and it kind of spiraled out of control and he would throw his weight around and things like that.
Eh,
But anyway, let's get back to you. Here's a good question for you. Why didn't you follow in your father's footsteps? How come you didn't fall in love with motorcycles and clubs and want to join a club and so on and so forth?
I had heard enough stories by the time I was 14 or 15 that I was like,
Not for me.
I'm not that cool. Not
Yeah,
that tough.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
I
yeah,
mean,
yeah.
I've got a big body and some anger issues, but no, I'm not that. I've honestly never even driven a motorcycle.
Wow, really?
Yeah, so he put me on one when I was about 16, and I took it off the kickstand to feel the weight of it, and I was just like,
Not for you.
nah. I mean, he told me stories like, yeah, I dumped a couple weeks ago, and blah
Yeah.
blah blah. And I'm like, well, shit, if he can dump, I ain't got no fucking prayer.
Yeah,
You know?
yeah, he's been riding forever. If he can, yeah,
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 yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
No,
he is.
no, no. It
Yeah,
just it just never intrigued me. I
just not
mean,
for you.
the story of his life, it always interested me.
Hmm.
Um, it didn't engage me until he was gone and I had his stuff and I would start like researching. So I
Right,
had
right, right.
like newspaper subscriptions to, different archives,
Hmm.
different like New York Times has an archive you can subscribe to, Newsday, Long Island Press, some of the national papers. So shit, at one point I had probably $200 a month in newspaper subscriptions,
Yeah, yeah,
searching
yeah, yeah,
archives. So,
yeah.
you know, um, that's later in life I got the bug to, damn, he was cool. Let me find out more, you know.
Right, right, right,
But
right,
at
right.
the time, no, it was never, no, I'm not gonna join. I don't,
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
you're actually you're better off.
Yeah, a
And
little
and I
bit.
and I say this because a lot of times those are big shoes to fill,
Mhm.
right? Those are big shoes to fill, and most of the time you can't fill them, so you're better off going in another direction, right? I'll
Oh,
use the
yeah.
example as LeBron James's son. He should have played baseball. You know,
Yeah,
because
he
he
screwed
should
it
have
up
played
bad.
he should have played baseball because everybody's shitting on him because he's a basketball player and everybody knows they only picked him because he's a LeBron James son. It's like, dude,
Exactly.
you should have went to play tennis, do something else. Christ.
Now, with my luck, I would have joined the club at 19 or 21 and got shot,
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
you know,
One more question, Van, and I'm gonna let you go. Um, have you ever heard from other clubs, specifically the Angels and Pagans, that knew of your dad and actually spoke to him about you or complimented him about maybe his the way he carried himself, how loyal he was, so on and so forth?
I have from one of those clubs. I can't mention who it was.
Okay.
But
Can you mention the club? You don't have to mention the person.
it was the Angels on
Okay.
West Coast.
Okay. All right.
So after the Ohio event, there's a newspaper clipping I have that the Angels loaded two planes from Oakland and
Mm-hmm.
were going to fly and land in Kennedy Airport.
Ah, yeah. Okay.
Um, but yeah, I found one of those members and he was super cool. He was very nondescript,
Mm-hmm.
but he said, "Yeah, your dad was a real one."
That's cool, man. That because that right there, if you
Yeah,
that's like I that
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 that's yeah
that
that
those shoes are too big to fill, man. I'm glad you took another direction.
that was the purpose of the page. I did it for
Right.
me, but now to hear something like that or to hear another member say, your dad was the complete outlaw, it was just like
Wow. Yeah.
he's proud.
You get it. I fully understand where you're coming from, man. You know, I truly do. I am going to end it here, but don't go away because I want to ask you some questions
Okay.
off camera. But Vin, great interview. Much love, much respect. We will stay in touch. And you're doing your dad and your family a great service and truly enjoy what you're doing. I truly enjoy having you on, brother.
Thank you, man. I'm privileged to be here.